Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. It's been quite a while since I've produced any videos, and the reason for that is, well, 2020. So let's fix that without any further ado. Today we're going to be restoring, I guess you'd call it an antique, although they're not particularly rare. We're going to be restoring a Stanley 60.5 low-angle block plane. Now this is mine, which is in perfectly good shape and does not require any work. However, I have one here from a friend that it was his father's, I believe, and the adjustment here for the blade depth uses a double-threaded adjustment, and the threads in the body of the plane are stripped out. So that's a little block of cast iron there in the back of the plane, and those threads are completely gone, as is demonstrated by this piece that just slides in. So those threads are completely shot. It appears that the threads on this adjustment are the same. Both, there's a 1/4 inch, is that in focus? Maybe not. But the back part is 1/4 28, and the front part looks like 12 28. So they both measure up. If you use a thread pitch gauge, the 28 piece will match up with the 28 in front and the 28 in the back. Now the 28 in the back carries the actual adjusting piece that engages with two little teeth into the plane blade, while this threaded hole here rides on the 1/4 28 part. So obviously, if the 1/4 28 part has the same pitch as the 12 28 part, nothing's going to move unless one of them is a reverse thread or a different thread. Well, it turns out that the 12 28 is in fact a different pitch. If you look closely, you may be able to tell that the 1/4 28 pitch has a slightly different angle. The angle of the helix is slightly less than the angle of the 12 28 pitch. And that is because the 12 28 is a double thread. It's two threads of 28 pitch, if you will, depth and V-shape. In other words, the depth of thread would be what you would find for a normal 28 pitch thread. However, the actual pitch of the thread is 14 per inch, and there are two such threads 180 degrees apart, and this is what's known as a double start thread. And you can have double start, triple start, quadruple start. You can have as many threads as you want to increase the pitch of a thread and still retain the very fine teeth that you may want for strength or cosmetics or whatever. So indeed, that is how this works. Turning this screw one turn, one rotation, will advance the 12 28 35 thousandths of an inch. However, the number 12 thread, which is actually a 14 pitch, will advance 70 thousandths of an inch. So each turn advances the adjuster 35 thousandths of an inch, because the screw is moving faster than the adjuster. And that's how that works. So how are we going to fix this? Well, this block of cast iron in there is not something that we want to try to braze or refill with a lot of heat and a lot of temperature. Partially because I don't want to destroy the burgundy Japanning on this. That's really part of its nature. They made these primarily with black Japanning, but they also made it in blue and they made it in burgundy. And I've rarely seen the burgundy. So I don't want to destroy all that paint. I don't really want to destroy the patina on this cast iron, and I certainly don't want to destroy the casting, because when you have a large flat area of thin cast iron, the last thing you want to do is get it red hot, because it's going to shrink. It's going to shrink in that thin area, and it's probably going to crack. It's probably going to leave. It's going to spread. It has to thicken when you heat it, because it has no place to go, being surrounded by colder metal. And as it cools, it's not necessarily going to thin out. It's just going to break. So we don't want to do any brazing on this. We were thinking of possibly of doing some TIG brazing, which really focuses the heat in a much smaller area, but I've got a better solution. The better solution is we're going to mill this out, and we're going to we have a 5/16 block of brass that is going to be drilled and tapped for, you guessed it, 1228. Double start. And so you're going to see me make a double start tap, which I think you'll find interesting, and heat treat it, grind it, polish it, whatever's got to be done, and cut my thread, and eventually probably either soft solder into here or epoxy. I haven't decided yet which I prefer. We've got to mill it out at an angle to agree with the angle, the downward angle here, and glue it in. So let's get started. We're going to make our tap first. First thing we're going to do is we're going to put a center on here. Not a terribly large center. Because I want to be able to get my threading tool in there. And I'm going to thread about 1 3/4 inches of thread. I'm going to end up grinding some of that back. I'm losing some of it. Make our first thread 10 thousandths deep. Now I want to measure this with a set of wires. So if you've never measured threads with wires before, this is a good situation to use them, because we're cutting a odd size thread, an odd pitch, and we want to know that our depth of thread, or our actual pitch diameter, is correct for the thread type we're doing. And we measure 241. So let's see if that's right. We're going to do some calculations here. If you've never measured a thread this way, I believe there's a few very good videos out there. Tom Lipton comes to mind. Okay, so 241 minus 3 times the diameter of the wire, which is 0.24, leaves us with 169. And if we add to that this line is 60 divided by the pitch, which is 28, well, it's a 28 depth of thread, so we're going to say 28. We end up with 199.9. Our desired depth of thread for this is 197 to 192. That is our range of acceptable sizes, and we're at 199. So we've got to take from 199 to 197. That's a 1/1000th of an inch difference. We have to plunge in another 1,000th. No big deal. We can do that. And that probably amounts actually to another spring pass. So I'm just going to zero this out and do just that. Take another spring pass. This time my measurement is, wiggle it around a little bit, make sure I got all the play out of it. Slide it off. And we're at 237. It's like 236.3. I think that's good. We're going to call that done. Okay, now here comes the fun part. Yes, folks, this is the part you've all been waiting for. I've got my chuck. I can bring my chuck around and index it. Okay, that's pretty close to having my, let me back you out here. I'm pretty close to having this right up dead center at 12 o'clock. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to disengage my gears, to my quick change gearbox. I'm going to rotate this chuck 180 degrees and then re-engage my cutting gears. And that's how I'm going to get move my thread to in between the one I just cut. So I'm going to open my gearbox and hold my gears in place. Or at least mark the alignment of them. Disengage my gears. Rotate my chuck 180 degrees. Oh, I need to disengage my back gear first. Okay. Hold my chuck, my gears in place. 180 degrees. Here we go. And re-engage my back gears. Oh, let's shift a little. Let me go the other way. Okay, that feels, yep, that's it. That's good. So I'm right where I'm looking at the alignment on the little, there's a little gear boss here and the thimble setting here. And that's lined up. This is 180. Looking at my chuck. I can re-engage my back gear now and go back to threading. Now, with any luck, I will re-engage my thread dial and the new thread will appear or start right between the old thread. Alright, let's go 5 thou. Okay, can I get a little tighter on that? No, not as much as I'd like. But the new thread is just a little to the right of center. of the first thread, but it'll move to center as I feed in, because I'm feeding in at 30 degrees or 29 and a half. So let's finish this up. And there you have a double start 12, 28, or is it 12, 14? Who knows? I say 12, 28 double start. Now we have to cut some relief grooves in here to turn these threads into actual threading teeth. Cut a relief profile on here with a little back relief for the initial cutting. We're going to do that on the tool and die grinder, and we're going to cut 4 flats on the other end to hold it in a tap wrench or a tap handle. So, moving on. Okay, so pretty straightforward here. We've got our part mounted in the block. We're going to line it up with the edge of the drawer on the vise, tighten it in, cut a flat on here, and do that 4 times. So let's line up. We want about a 5/16 flat. Okay, so quick and easy. I'm just going to come down and touch off and go about 22 thousandths more. So just to leave a little bit of the radius on the 1/4 inch rod. We'll call that done. Now, so I got my 4 flats. We'll go deburr this a little, and we're going to come back, and we have to mill the 4 cutting flutes in the actual thread cutting end. So what I learned from cutting the first piece was that I can clamp this in a block and let this thread overhang, and put a machinist jack under here, but it still wobbles around sideways. So I tried clamping a V block in place, and so I decided the best way to do this is just to make a little jig that's drilled out to the major diameter of this thread. So this inserts in there, and I can clamp this in the vise. So there's my fixture. So I'm just going to mill away. I'm going to mill away until I have exposed enough of the hole here that I can get my ball end mill into that thread. And we're going to use this. This will be a nice repeatable jig. I've put a relief slot through it so I can clamp it in the vise. I'll let this end hang out because I left a little tiny bit of web in there just to act as a hinge to keep the rest of this all lined up, so I'm not dealing with 2 pieces flopping around. Okay. So I'll line it up roughly square in there. It snaps in nice. Like the fixture took a little bit of a set. And I could set that down in there and tighten my vise. And that should be a good setup. So there's our 3/32 ball end mill. Tiny little thing in it. Oh, get that collet in there. Get our ball end mill set in there. Okay, so we've got our ball end mill set up. Get it centered on the part. Got my vise all dialed in. So all we have to do is pick a depth, make a first pass. So let's touch off first. Okay, so we've got our ball end mill all set up in the machine. We're just above our work here, and we're centered on that work. And vise is trimmed in, you know, all the usuals. Now this is a piece of glass clear rolling paper. It mics up at right at 1/1000th of an inch. I don't know what it's made out of. I'm not going to smoke it, but I am going to use it to touch off here because I've got so many little points on this the 4-flute cutter and the paper. So I'm just going to use this to judge my height here, and I just pinched it. Okay, and just right about there, I got it pinched, and I'm reading 10/1000ths on my downfeed veneer. So I want to end up with, for a 3/32 cutter, I want to end up going about half that depth. No, about 94/1000ths, let's say. So half of that is going to be 46. So for all intents and purposes, we can call that 50. So let's make it, well, I could do 23. 23,000. Let's do 23/1000ths per pass. Glass clear rolling papers. Who'd have thunk it? So that's my finished pass at 45/1000ths depth. I got a nice tooth. Nice tooth on that cutting edge of those threads. I'll polish that up after I heat treat. I'll polish that up with a Dremel just a little bit. I'm going to do a final finish pass on the other side. I decided just to go with the 2-flute on this, and the reason being is that I'm only using this for brass. This doesn't even have to be. Probably I don't even have to heat treat this, but I will anyway. Okay, so we've just finished heat treating this, and you see we ground a taper on the end, and I don't know if you can see there's a little flat right behind the cutting edge. There's a little flat behind the cutting edge, and then we've got a relief ground behind it. It's a 2-flute cutter, so hopefully you can see there's a flat at the cutting edge, which is just about tangent to the radius of the thread, and then a relief cut behind that edge. And we've heat treated it and tempered it. I'll maybe do another video on that whole process, but that's just a matter of, you know, for this small piece, just hitting it with the turbo torch and dunking it in a can of oil, and then polishing the blue off of it here, so I can see the color on each end, and then tempering it so that I can get a little straw color. And it seems to have worked this time. Here's our Here's our brass nut that we've managed to successfully tap, and I'm very happy about that. So that's a 2814 double start thread. I guess that's what we'd call that. Would we call that 1228? No, I don't think so. It's a 14 pitch. It's a 28 thread depth and thread form, but it's a 14 pitch double start. And this will get labeled and thrown in a drawer and probably never used again, because I don't expect that I will ever be repairing one of these planes again. Let me bring this light a little bit behind the camera. That's better. So I don't know that I'll ever be repairing one of these planes again. So now we're going to mill this out. We're going to mill this out, and we're either going to braze or solder this in to that location so that it sits right where the old thread was, in between these two ears, and performs the same function. Hopefully it'll last longer than the cast iron did. So let's move on to that. Anyway, here's the nut that we made, and I don't know if you notice, but the hole is a little bit off center, and that's deliberate, because I'm going to set it in the plane. We're going to be setting it right here in the plane, and you notice it's a little bit raised here. It's about 20 thousandths raised in this middle. So we're gonna cut the hole, cut the slot just a little shallow, and set this in there. Quite a bit proud, actually, maybe about 35 thousandths proud, 30 thousandths proud. And then we're going to take, we're going to mill a little bit off the top, so the hole will actually be more in line with, let me grab it over here, the little piece that floats on top of that, which moves in and out with the screw, to adjust the location of the blade. We're pretty pleased with that, and so that's what's going to get affixed in that slot. So now we need to cut that slot out. And that slot is at an angle to the bed. Obviously it is the bed angle. It is at the bed angle, and that angle happens to be 12.5 degrees. When I originally measured it, I thought it was about 15, but once I got it on my surface plate and started setting up this angle block, it turns out I was a little bit off, but I was using one of those crude protractors. But this is dead on, nice and flat, parallel to the surface plate, and I did that by actually running a straight edge from the blade edge, from where the blade sits here, all the way to this spot. So it's kind of like a 3-point contact, if you want to think of the blade edge as being 2 points. It's actually infinite number of points, I guess. And I may smooth that up a little bit with a little emery or something. I can feel a little roughness there, so I want to smooth that out too. But I want to do as little to this as possible, and I'm really hesitant to even mill this out, but I have no choice. And after some experimentation with soldering, brazing, soft soldering, silver soldering, or hard soldering, and various other methods, I think ultimately that I'm going to be simply using some good iron-filled epoxy to set this block in place. easily removed, minimal damage to the plane, certainly no heat stressing of the plane, and because I have no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that if I put a torch to that and I get over 1,000 degrees and soft solder is up around 700, that I'm going to warp this plane. I'm going to warp the soul of this plane. And I'm certainly going to ruin the Japanning, and this is the burgundy Japanning, which was a little less common on these planes. I want to do as little to this plane as possible. So I think epoxy is more than sufficient, especially on a surface that's 5/16 by ½ inch times 3. I think that's plenty of surface area on 3 sides of that block to hold it well in place. Simply enough tug and push and pull to move a plane blade. Now, obviously, somebody stripped out this thread, this cast iron thread, but they must have had the plane really tight to do that. All right, so without any further ado, it's time to do the irreversible nasty to this, and we're going to place this in our vise, of course, and it's time to mill that slot. And as they say, fish or cut bait. Well, it's time to fish. So there we go. We have a nice 5/16 4-flute titanium nitride coated Niagara cutter, and it's just about brandy new and very sharp, and it should do a pretty good job. If I overcut, if the 5/16 is slightly over, that's fine, because I need a little clearance for my epoxy, and I'm going to be cutting or filing, more likely, some grooves in the brass, as well as roughing up the surface of the cast iron here, so that we get a good bond with the epoxy. So let's get to that. Okay, so we're all set up to cut. I have centered my cutter between the side walls of the plane, not on the boss here, because ultimately, where do I want my plane blade to sit? Where do I want its natural sitting location would be evenly between the 2 side walls, so that you have even clearance and a straight parallel blade projecting through the bottom of the sole. So it's the difference between, the casting's pretty good. I mean, the difference is only a few thousandths of an inch, but it is off center just slightly relative to this threaded block versus the size of the casting. So, time to go. Looks excellent. And we're going to go with that. So I finished my cuts, and you can see what the slot looks like. It's pretty clean. It's a nice fit. Whoop, dropped my nut. Okay, so we have our little slot cut there, and this is our nut. It fits in there nicely. It's just a little proud. So let's see about mixing up some epoxy, getting this set in there, and then after 24 hours or so, we'll come and we'll plane off the top of that just a little bit to get us exactly at the height we want. And I may run the cutter across this I have to see how rough this this opening is for the plane that the actual blade will be sitting on, because that's where you get the chatter. If the blade flexes, as it's cutting, and it doesn't have a good contact in that mouth opening, that's where you'll get blade chatter. Not that I think it's a problem, but I'm at least going to check it. Now's the time to do it. Just want to show you what I've done here. I've used a thread file. If you've never used a thread file, they're pretty handy. They come in metric and imperial sizes, and this has gotten me out of a lot of scrapes where you have a shaft sticking out of a machine and it's got a buggered thread on the end, and you don't want to take the whole machine apart to stick it in a lathe, or you don't have a tap for some huge 1" 20 thread or something. This'll get you by. This'll clean up the threads so you can get the nut back on and be on your way. So I used that to cut a 28 pitch set of serrations in the sides of the block to set it in the epoxy, to hold it in the epoxy. You don't have to be very deep, but they're nice and straight and regular, and I think they should do just fine. Okay, so we're all ready to epoxy this block into our plane, and I'm going to be using a very well-known metal-filled epoxy product here, and I'm not going to mention the product name, not because I don't like the product or it's anything wrong with it, or that I have any issue with giving them any free advertising. My issue with this is that people use this for repairing so many things that are just janky, that it has, in my mind, has become associated with very Rube Goldberg, jury-rigged type repairs that were probably best left undone. Although, I mean, this has worked in many instances, but I'm not a big fan of most of the places where people use this product, such as duct tape as well. Duct tape is another one of my pet peeves. Duct tape will fix anything. Well, not really. Anyway, you all know it very well. I'm not going to mention it. But here we go. So we're going to, we need very little of this, actually. These are pretty close fitting parts. There is, frankly, very little advantage to having a thick layer of bonding material. I frequently, I bedded a few actions on some of my bang sticks, and you don't need a 16th inch layer of epoxy in there. Okay, so before I mix that and set this, I'm going to take a little acetone, which reminds me I really have to get to my magic potions and elixir video one of these days about when to use acetone and when to use alcohol, when to use mineral spirits, and all the pluses and minuses and reasons for both. So I'm just going to wipe out. There's no grease in here. I didn't use any lubricant on the cutting, but I do want to wipe out the surface graphite that has been released in the machining, and you can see the gray on there. You can see the gray in that Q-tip, so we want to get rid of that. And just for good measure, I'll go back in with the dry side and see what that looks like, and that looks pretty clean white. Okay, very good. Let's do this. And that should be pretty sufficient. Should it's well mixed. So, actually what I'm going to do, I'm going to break my Q-tip here, and I'm just going to dab it in here with the Q-tip. Just get it to make contact. See how sticky it is. If it doesn't adhere to the surface, well, then obviously there's a problem. But it's sticking just fine. So, no graphite problem that I can tell. And now, maybe I'll get just a little more down in the corners here. Confirm that my top is indeed on top. Looks good. What squeezed out the front and back, I'll leave. I'll take care of that later. That'll flake right off. And it's about 55 degrees down here in the basement today, so this is going to take a good while to cure. So I'm going to leave this for at least 24 hours, maybe more. And my test bed will be this mess right here. I will place that on my Q-tip, and I will come down and poke that on occasion to see how hard it is when it loses its resilient rubbery consistency. It should be ready. So let's wrap this up. As you can see, we have got our brass implant into the base of the plane. It's well situated, it aligned nicely, and the epoxy hardened up really well. I actually don't remember this particular epoxy getting as hard as this is. I tried cleaning up the squeeze out, and it really gave me a hard time. Normally it's a little bit elastic and it just sort of will snap away with a little coaxing with a blade or chisel. This stuff is really quite tough, so I'm happy about that. So now I'm going to put it back in my my little fixture to hold it in place at 12.5 degrees, and I'm going to plane off about 17 thousandths actually from this, which will bring it in line with being just the right distance and square to the center line of the screw that's going through there, and that should work out just fine. So let me touch off here, and we'll see. Yeah, it actually touches off at about 20. So I'm going to back it out, and I'm going to come down. I'm going to come down 10 initially. Turn this off. Still feels a little high. I'm going to come down to 0, which is where I touched off originally, and we should be done. Okay, well, there might be a little tiny bit of flash over on the edges of that cut. I'll clean that up with a razor, and this package is done. Let's go back over to the bench and see what this looks like all put together. Okay, try again. Had a little hiccup with the camera. So we've got the piece in here finally, and appears to be well situated. We did a little milling on the top of it. You might be able to see them. Hopefully, see some of the milling marks on that. It's smooth enough. I'm not going to polish it out. And here's the piece that's going to be going in there. And the milling on the top was important. That when the thread is actually running true to the bore, that this little L-shaped carrier here is nice and parallel to the top, so we don't want it binding. So hopefully you can see that that piece is, in fact, it wobbles slides from side to side, but it is making contact across the entire face of the block now, whereas before it was up in the air a little bit. It was only making contact at the rear. So we're going to put this together with a little bit of grease to help it along, and I'm using a grease that I've become fond of using on woodworking machinery. It's a synthetic, what they call a microgel. It's a shell product, Aeroshell 22. I guess they use it for aircraft. So they indicate it. But what I have found is that this grease, in addition to being, rather thick, and it doesn't migrate, which means that there are no lighter components like oil that separate out of it, as opposed to most petroleum greases are some sort of a so they use soap to get a more waxy consistency out of an oil, and they eventually separate. They frequently separate, not always. I'm not a lubricant specialist, but I have learned that these things do occur. And I'm going to put a tiny bit of lubricant on the top of it, just a thin, super thin film, and I'm just going to wipe the rest away. All right, let's screw it together. And now you see I'm starting with the tailpiece actually about halfway up its thread in here, because it's moving at half the speed as the front thread, and maybe we'll start that a little more. So we'll back it out. Okay, that should place us. Okay, so this throughout its travel, I would like these two little tangs that are pushing and pulling on the blade to pretty much stay on this block. That's where the forces will be impinging. So I don't want to cantilever that force off the top of the block. So that's where we're going to leave it. That's full forward. Let's see if I have a blade for this. It did not come with a blade. Okay, I have two similar but not identical planes. I think this being the most similar. So this blade should suffice for our test. I like to set the tension initially with the screw in the locked position. Then I know it's not too tight. And blade is good and sharp. Let me see if I can find a piece of wood. Okay, here's a piece that I've been testing on with various things. And this is red oak, and that's a good strip. It's a piece of tongue and groove test piece. I have some cross grain in here, and yeah, it's a pretty good shaving. It feels good. I don't feel any chatter. I did check the throat here, and I've got good contact on the blade, and the adjustment feels just perfect, smooth. No problem whatsoever. So there you have it. One restored family heirloom, and this will go in a box and get shipped out to the heir. And I hope he enjoys it. I certainly enjoyed fixing it for him. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and hope I have some more for you in the future. Be well.